Hello. Today we are going to look at how seatbelts work in a car. Now, before we can delve into the mechanics and the dynamics that occur when a seatbelt locks, we must first look at what happens to the car that causes the seatbelt to lock. Over here we have a picture of a car. Let us begin by drawing our forces that are acting on the car. Firstly, we have our force applied. Secondly, we have our force of friction. And then obviously, despite us being on a horizontal plane, we still have our force of gravity and our force normal. Let's just extend these arrows all the way. Now, because there's a force applied, there is an acceleration that is occurring. Because there is an acceleration, we will look at this car in an inertial frame of reference. Now, as the driver is driving, his name, for the sake of this explanation, shall be John. As John is driving his car at 60 kilometers an hour, suddenly a wall appears. Now, John's car will hit this wall. What happens when John's car will hit this wall is that John will want to continue moving based on Newton's first law of motion, because an object in motion wants to stay in motion unless another force acts on it. So what will end up happening is that as the car slams into the wall, Jonathan will want to continue moving, so he will either smash through the windshield and land and hit the wall, or he will end up on his hood. However, luckily for Jonathan, he was smart enough to wear his seatbelt today. Now, while it was inertia that might have killed him had he not been wearing his seatbelt, it will also be inertia that will save him because he was wearing his seatbelt. To better understand this, we will look at the system of a seatbelt. What we have over here is what the system for a seatbelt essentially looks like. All the way over here we have our seatbelt, right? What is currently being allowed is that we're allowed to move the belt freely. We're allowed to move the belt freely at a moment when the car is moving normally and it hasn't crashed into anything or come to a very sudden and abrupt stop, meaning that there is no change in inertia. However, once Bob hits the wall, here is what will happen. Similar to how Bob wanted to continue moving in the direction he was moving, this mass down here will also want to do the same. So what will end up happening to this mass is that because it wants to continue moving forward, it will do so because this mass just isn't any mass. It's on a weighted pendulum, and this weighted pendulum is connected to something called a pawl. What a pawl is that it's a metal disc that is right up against the gear that a seatbelt is hooked up to. Because the mass and the pawl are connected, and the inertia caused the mass to move forward, therefore the pawl will also do the same. What this shall do is it will lock the gearing system in place, no longer allowing me to move the seatbelt, therefore saving John's life. Now, looking at it like this may be a little bit difficult to understand. So, what was created was a more 3D model that is slightly easier to understand. Now, this 3D model represents the mechanism of a seatbelt. Over here you have your gear, over here you have your pawl, and down here you have your weighted mass, or your pendulum that extends and connects all the way to your paw through this plate. Now, the seatbelt isn't represented here, but it really doesn't need to be. We're going to assume that a seatbelt runs through this gear and all the way to the person sitting wherever he is. What can happen at this point in time is that the gear can spin freely, unopposed, because the paw is not shifted in position. However, what happens when the car has a force applied to it, causing it to crash into something? Let's look at our car now. Based on the information we saw previously, our car wanted to continue moving in the direction that it was moving, which resulted in the pendulum shifting forward due to inertia, therefore causing this blue and red paw, causing it to shift forward, therefore locking my gear in place, no longer allowing me to move it, or allowing me to move it very, very little. This is the system that allows the seatbelt to work, and it is the inertia of the mass down here that causes the seatbelt not to move anymore. Thank you for watching my video on how seatbelts work. I hope you have learned some information about Newton's first law of motion and how to look at something in a single state in a inertial frame of reference.